The Christmas that never came. Some stories stay buried inside you for years, not because you forget them, but because you can never find the right words. This is one of those stories, and I need you to understand from the very first sentence, what you're about to hear actually happened to real people, in real American towns, in real homes where families once felt safe. I want you to lock your doors before you keep reading. My family relocated to a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio when I was 10 years old. My father had custody and he'd made friends with a neighbor down the street, a single mother named Carol who was raising her 3 kids on her own. Carol was the kind of woman who baked casseroles for people she barely knew and left her porch light on all night. She worked double shifts at the county hospital and did it without a single complaint. Her oldest daughter, Kayla, was 12 when I first met her. We weren't close, more like the kind of neighborhood kids who wave at each other from driveways and end up in the same friend group by default. By the time we were both settled into the rhythm of the block, we shared a circle of mutual friends, including a kid everyone called Danny. Danny was that classic type, a little reckless, always laughing, the kind of boy who'd sneak out of houses through bedroom windows without a second thought. One evening, a week before Christmas, Danny was hanging out at Carol's house with Kayla and her younger brother, Marcus. Carol was pulling a night shift at the hospital. The 3 of them had the house to themselves. Now, here's something you need to know about Carol. She was a giving person to a fault. Through her work at the hospital, she'd built a relationship with a woman named Rhonda, a kind, soft-spoken lady who was dealing with her own quiet heartbreak. Carol had learned that Rhonda's sister, a woman with a long and troubling psychiatric history, had recently been released from a state mental health facility after a 2-year stay. Carol knew this. She kept it filed away in the back of her mind, the way you file away information you hope you'll never need. That night, someone knocked at the door. Kayla assumed it was her mother. Carol always knocked the same way, 3 quick taps, then a pause, then 2 more. It was their signal. So when the knock came, Kayla moved toward the door without really thinking. Danny, who absolutely was not supposed to be there, panicked. He bolted through the back bedroom window and ran down the road to his own house. He never stopped to look back. He never even thought twice about it. It wasn't Carol at the door. Standing on the porch was the sister, the woman who had just been discharged from the psychiatric facility. She had spent weeks methodically piecing together the connection between her sister and Carol, learning the family's address, learning Carol's schedule. She had planned this. She had waited for exactly this night. What happened inside that house in the next hour, I don't know the full details of, and I am genuinely grateful for that. What I do know, what the police reports and the devastated neighbors and the local news all confirmed, is that Marcus, just 9 years old, managed to escape through the back of the house and sprint to the neighbors to call 911. But it was too late for Kayla. She was murdered in her own home. 1 week before Christmas. She was 12 years old. The details of what was done to her are something I won't put into words here, because some images shouldn't be placed in anyone's mind. The investigators had to search through the wrapped presents under the tree as part of their work, and I don't know what they found or where, but they found what they needed. I was not allowed to attend her funeral. I've never been able to fully explain what it felt like to lose someone that way. Not a best friend, not a sister, but someone orbiting your daily life so closely that her absence created a silence so thick, it felt physical. For years afterward, I'd drive past that house and feel something cold climb up my spine. I still do. This is the kind of loss that changes the architecture of a neighborhood. Carol never came back to that street. Marcus grew up carrying something that no child should have to carry. And Danny, who climbed out of a window and ran, lived with the specific guilt of someone who got out. He didn't do anything wrong, but survivor guilt doesn't care about logic. Some people say evil comes in dramatic forms: storms, catastrophes, monsters from stories. But the truth is, sometimes evil knocks at the door in the quiet. Week before Christmas, when the porch light is on and the tree is lit up, and a 12-year-old girl thinks it's her mother coming home. Lock your doors. The woman with the purse. Let me tell you about a woman who never once in her 78 years of life considered herself a victim. Not once. Her name was Dorothy, and she was the kind of grandmother who wore sensible shoes, grew tomatoes in her backyard, and had opinions about everything from the proper way to fold a fitted sheet to the state of American politics. When my wife and I started dating, Dorothy was already in her mid-60s, widowed about a year after her husband of 40 years passed from a heart condition, and still sharp as a tack. She refused to stop living. That's the important part. After her husband died, Dorothy could have withdrawn. She could have locked herself inside her comfortable home in the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas, and let grief do what grief often does to people her age. Instead, she started volunteering at the local library 3 afternoons a week. She said the socialization kept her brain moving. She checked out books on bird migration and the history of Texas cattle ranching, and read every mystery novel she could get her hands on. The library closed at 5 in the evening. Dorothy's house was just under a mile away, through a stretch of lightly wooded land on the edge of a neighborhood. The kind of walk that, in daylight, feels peaceful and almost cinematic. But in January in South Texas, 5 o'clock means the sky's already fading to orange and purple, and by the time you've locked up and said your goodbyes, you're walking home in the dark. On one particular Tuesday evening, another volunteer offered Dorothy a ride home. She thanked him and declined. She'd been making this walk for months. She needed the exercise. She'd be fine. She started down the familiar path, her purse on her left arm, her breath visible in the cool air. She noticed him about 4 minutes into the walk. A man, maybe 60 yards behind her, moving in the same direction. This in itself is not alarming. People walk. But there was something about the pace. He was moving faster than the average evening stroller, not jogging, but with intention, closing the gap in the practiced way of someone who has done this before. Dorothy kept walking. She didn't speed up dramatically. She didn't want to appear frightened, but she made note of things. The light was failing. The path was quiet. She was maybe half a mile from her front door. She began to count her steps. Soon the man was 20 yards behind her. Then 10. She could hear his footsteps on the packed dirt. She thought about screaming. She thought about running. She was 72 years old with a replaced left knee, and she weighed the options with the calm precision of a woman who had been planning for this moment for 3 years. Because here's what Dorothy had been doing since her husband died, since the day she realized she was a woman alone in the world. She had been carrying a .38 caliber revolver in her purse. She had gotten her license. She had gone to a range. She had practiced. When the man's hand came down hard on her right shoulder, and when he said, low and steady, "Don't turn around. Hand over your purse or I'll use this," Dorothy stopped walking. She stood completely still. She let a single beat of silence pass. Then she took one large step forward, pivoted on her good knee, and shot him in the throat. The man survived the initial wound, but spent the next 4.5 years in a prison hospital, where he eventually died from complications. Law enforcement later connected him to 2 prior assaults on women walking alone in the area. Dorothy cooperated fully with investigators, answered every question without flinching. and went home the same evening. She passed away last spring at 81, peacefully in her own bed, surrounded by her family. Until the very end, Dorothy maintained one singular regret about that night on the path. She always said she pulled the trigger a half-second too soon. The white SUV. This is the story my family never fully talked about. Not because it ended badly, but because it didn't. And somehow that made it harder to process. When something terrible almost happens, people want to believe it was nothing. They want to call it a coincidence and move on. But there are some coincidences that leave marks. I was around 8 or 9 years old when it started. My sister Renee was 16, 7 years older than me, quick-tempered and fiercely protective in the way that older sisters can be. She smoked. Our parents didn't love it, but they'd accepted it and made her smoke outside, on the driveway, away from the house. This meant that several times a day, Renee would step outside, and I would follow her. I was at that age where annoying my older sister felt like a meaningful life goal. We lived in a rural stretch of land in central Pennsylvania, on a long gravel driveway that opened out to a 2-lane county road, the kind of quiet where you can hear a car coming from a mile away, which is why the white SUV was so hard to ignore. It was large, fully blacked-out windows, tinted so dark that from the shoulder of the road, you genuinely could not see who or what was inside. It had a roof rack, and it had a habit of parking at the far end of our driveway, engine running, facing the house, just sitting there. Renee noticed it first. The initial appearances were irregular, once while our parents were out, then again a few days later. Always when she came outside to smoke, always staying for the duration and then slowly pulling away when she went back inside. After the third time, it established a secondary position, the parking lot of a small church at the end of the road. From there, the driver had a clear sightline to our driveway. When Renee was outside, the SUV watched. When she went in, it left. My father was a county sheriff's deputy at the time. He filed a formal complaint. Police drove by, did a loop of the area, didn't find the vehicle. For several months, nothing happened. Then, about 9 months after the first sighting, it came back. I remember one afternoon, our parents weren't home, as usual. Renee had stepped out for a cigarette, and I was standing at the front window watching from inside. The white SUV rolled to its usual spot at the end of the driveway and stopped. Just stopped. Like a predator in tall grass. Renee watched it. It watched her. Then she made a decision I still think about. She put out her cigarette, squared her shoulders, and started walking toward it. She told us later that she made it about halfway down the driveway, 30 yards, maybe 40, when something stopped her. She described it as a wall she couldn't see, not a physical barrier, but a sensation so absolute that her legs simply refused to carry her forward. She said she felt, with complete certainty, that if she crossed an invisible line in that driveway, she would never come back. She turned around and went inside. She never told me she was scared. Renee didn't do scared. But I saw her hands when she came through the door, and they were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. The confrontation came a few weeks later, on a night our parents happened to be home. Our family car was in the shop, so no one was going anywhere. Renee went outside. I went with her. And when the white SUV appeared at the end of the driveway, I ran inside and told my father. He came out with his service weapon at his side, not raised but visible in hand. He walked briskly toward the road. The SUV floored it. It shot down the county road and blew through the intersection onto the highway at a speed that was, by any measure, reckless. My father, with the training of a law enforcement officer, clocked the make, the model, the year, and the distinguishing features before it disappeared from sight. The license plate had been covered with strips of duct tape. We never saw it again. I've thought about Renee stopping in that driveway thousands of times since then. I've thought about whatever instinct fired in her nervous system and told her body to stop. I don't have a clean explanation for it, but I believe, with everything in me, that the thing she felt, that invisible wall, was the truest warning she'd ever received in her life. And she listened. The cat by the door. I was 4 years old, maybe 5. My mother and father had recently separated, and my mother was renting a small ground-floor apartment in a 2-bedroom complex in western Michigan. The layout was simple. 2 bedrooms at the end of a single hallway, directly across from each other, and a living room and kitchen at the front. We were on the first floor. My mother had a window cracked in her room during the summer because the air conditioning was loud and she liked the night air. I almost always slept in her bed. I had my own room, but it felt big and empty, and her room felt safe. We had a gray tabby cat named Biscuit. Biscuit had 2 fixed habits: sleeping at the foot of my mother's bed and never making a sound after 10 o'clock at night. He was the most predictable animal I've ever known. This is what I remember. I woke up in the middle of the night. No particular reason, the way small children sometimes do, and sat up in bed. The room was dark except for the faint orange light coming through the curtains. My mother was asleep beside me, and Biscuit was not at the foot of the bed. He was sitting in the doorframe of my mother's room, perfectly still, facing into the hallway. That was strange. Biscuit did not sit in doorways. As I watched, he stood up, walked slowly across the hall, and disappeared into my bedroom. Then I heard him meow. Once. Distinctly. I don't know why, but I turned and woke my mother up. I don't remember what I said. Probably just her name. Repeated until she opened her eyes. It took maybe 4 or 5 seconds for her to surface from sleep and focus on me. In those 4 or 5 seconds, something changed in the doorway. There was a man standing there. He was large. He was inside the apartment. And he was moving, not toward us but toward the hallway, toward the front of the apartment, like someone leaving, like someone who had been caught. What my mother did next, I have never fully understood from a physics standpoint. She was awake for less than 3 seconds. In that time, she grabbed me, a child who wasn't small for his age, and threw me through the window screen. Not pushed. Through. The screen popped out and I hit the grass outside, and she was already coming through the window behind me, and we were both running and screaming for help before I'd even processed what had happened. A neighbor called 911. Police arrived within minutes. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door was unlocked, which led investigators to believe the man had simply walked in and had been inside, hiding, waiting for an unknown amount of time. My mother insisted she had locked the deadbolt and the chain. She repeated this to every officer who asked. She never stopped believing it. About a week later, my mother was cleaning the kitchen and opened the closet where the water heater was stored. Inside, tucked behind the utility pipes, was a composition notebook. In it were names, drawings, lists. There was also a pair of dark work gloves and several gum wrappers. The police came again. They took everything as evidence. What they told my mother was that based on the notebook and its contents, they believed the man had been using that closet as a hiding spot, coming and going, perhaps over a period of weeks, waiting for the right moment. The right moment for what? They couldn't say with certainty, but they could say this. He had been in that apartment while we slept, more than once. I think about Biscuit a lot. I think about the way he walked across that hallway and meowed exactly once. I've never been able to decide whether that was instinct or something stranger. But I know this. If he hadn't moved, if I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't turned to my mother in those specific 4 seconds, I don't let myself finish that thought. The laugh in the basement. Every house has a sound, not the sounds it makes when the heat comes on or the pipes shift in cold weather. Those sounds you learn and catalog and eventually stop hearing. I mean the sound. The one that doesn't belong. The one that, once you hear it, rewires something fundamental in your brain about what it means to be alone in a building. I found mine on a Wednesday evening. I was doing laundry in the basement of the house I was renting in rural Tennessee, a 2-story farmhouse that had been divided into a rental unit with a finished basement accessed through a door off the kitchen. The basement itself was split in two by a wall with a doorframe, the laundry room on one side, and a second, larger room on the other that led to the staircase back up to the main floor. The light in the larger room blew out while I was mid-cycle. A single overhead bulb, nothing dramatic, just gone. Which meant that when I finished my laundry and needed to walk through that second room to reach the stairs, I would be walking through near total darkness. I am not, in general, a person who is afraid of the dark. I grew up in a rural area. I've camped alone. I've worked late in buildings by myself without particular anxiety. I finished the laundry methodically, sorted everything, moved it to the dryer, and steeled myself for the 30-foot walk through the unlit room to the staircase. I opened the laundry room door and stepped through. I made it about halfway. What I heard next came from directly behind me, not from the laundry room I had just exited, not from upstairs, not from any identifiable mechanical source. It came from the air, maybe 3 feet behind my head, at roughly the height of a person standing close. It was a laugh, not a chuckle, not a recording, not a television from upstairs bleeding through the floor. A full, textured human laugh, raspy and low and wet, like something that had been living in smoke for decades. And it wasn't nervous or uncertain. It was the laugh of something that found a situation funny in a way I was not equipped to understand. I did not investigate. I did not turn around. I ran up the stairs at a speed that I think surprised even my own body, emerged into the lit kitchen, and stood there with my back against the refrigerator until my heart slowed to something resembling normal. I waited until my roommate came home later that evening before going back down to change the bulb. I made sure to have the conversation casually. "Oh, the basement light went out. Could you come down with me for a second?" And I have never, to this day, told anyone who lives in that house what I heard. But I hear it sometimes, in the half-second before I fall asleep. I have not heard it again in the basement. I'm not sure that's comforting. The man under the bed. This story comes from a woman I'll call Jamie. We met through mutual friends in Chicago, and about a year into our friendship, she told me this over coffee, completely calm, in the matter-of-fact way that people sometimes deliver the most disturbing information. Like the specifics have been processed so many times they've lost their edges. Jamie was in her mid-20s and working as an English tutor in a suburb north of the city. One of her students was a 17-year-old named Caleb. Bright kid, a little scattered, always behind on homework but quick when he actually engaged with the material. They met twice a week at her apartment. One evening, they'd pushed their session late, well past 10, which wasn't unusual when Caleb had a major essay due. By the time they finished, the last bus he needed had stopped running. His home was across town. He asked Jamie if he could sleep on her living room floor and catch the first bus in the morning. Jamie was, understandably, hesitant. Having a teenage male student stay overnight at her one-bedroom apartment was not a situation she was comfortable with on several levels, professionally, personally, logistically. But Caleb lived far. It was late, and he was, after all, just a kid who needed somewhere safe to sleep for a few hours. She set him up on the couch with a pillow and a blanket. She went to bed. She left the bedroom door shut but not locked. At 2:17 in the morning, Caleb shook her awake. She opened her eyes to find him standing over her, and her first reaction was pure alarm. She sat up and pulled the blanket around herself and said, sharply, "What are you doing?" He held up one hand. He was not acting strange. He was calm. He said, "I'm hungry. Can we go get something to eat?" She stared at him. "It's 2 in the morning. Go back to sleep." He persisted. There was a place a few blocks away. 24 hours. He'd seen it on the way over. He was really hungry. He'd really like to go. Jamie thought he was being difficult. She told him there were crackers in the kitchen, there was cereal. He could help himself. She was not walking to a restaurant at 2 a.m. Caleb wouldn't drop it. He kept asking. He was polite about it, but he would not let it go. And something about his persistence, something in the specific flatness of his voice, the way he wouldn't quite meet her eyes, made her finally sit up, put on shoes and agree. They walked to the restaurant. They sat down. Caleb ordered food. Jamie sat across from him, exhausted and confused, and said, "Why was this so important?" Caleb put down his fork. He said, "When I woke up, I looked under your bed. He'd been sleeping low on the couch, low enough that he had a clear sight line across the floor and under the bed frame in the adjacent room through the gap under her bedroom door. There's a man sleeping under your bed," he said. "He's been there the whole time." Police responded within 8 minutes. The man found under Jamie's bed was identified as a former neighbor who had kept a spare key after he moved out, a detail Jamie hadn't known because she'd moved in after him. Investigators believe he had been entering her apartment regularly, sleeping under her bed, and leaving before she woke up. Based on what they found, they estimated he had been doing this for approximately 6 to 8 weeks. Caleb only saw him because he was low on the couch. If Caleb had slept on the floor, as Jamie originally suggested, he might not have had that sightline. If he hadn't been hungry at 2 a.m., he might never have looked. Jamie changed her locks. She moved 2 months later. She told me she still sleeps with the light on. She didn't say it like it was something she was embarrassed about. The road through nowhere. There is a stretch of highway in the American Southwest that I will never drive again. I've been back through that region several times since then, and every time I reroute. It's not superstition exactly. It's more like a promise I made to myself the day I made it out. I was driving from the high desert of Southern California, out past the mountains through the desolate basin country, heading toward New Mexico on a shortcut I'd used once before. 2-lane road, minimal traffic, essentially nothing in any direction for mile after mile. The kind of drive where you start to feel like the last human on Earth. There's a near-abandoned settlement you pass through about an hour in, and then the road starts climbing into a mountain range before flattening out into a long canyon stretch on the other side. I was traveling alone on a late afternoon in early spring. I was a veteran, had done 2 tours, and I'd developed the kind of situational awareness that doesn't fully switch off, even on a quiet road in the middle of nowhere. So when I came over the top of the canyon and saw what was in the road ahead, my brain processed it before I'd consciously decided what I was looking at. There was a red sports car, a small 2-door, maybe from the late 80s, stopped sideways across both lanes, not pulled to the shoulder, not angled off the road, perpendicular. blocking the entire roadway. A suitcase was open on the asphalt nearby, clothes scattered around it in a rough radius like something thrown open in a struggle. And there were two people face down in the road, a man and a woman, both motionless about 20 feet apart. I stopped about 100 feet back. The hair on the back of my neck went up, and I want to explain what that phrase means when it happens to someone who has been in genuinely dangerous situations. It's not metaphorical. It is a physical sensation, a full-body alert. Something was wrong. The scene was too organized, too placed. The bodies were at angles that looked chosen. The suitcase was open to maximum visibility. The car was positioned in the exact spot on the canyon road, where there was no easy shoulder to go around. One side was a rock face, the other was a drop-off. Unless you planned it. I sat in my stopped vehicle for approximately 4 seconds, scanning. There were ditches on both sides of the road, tall, dry grass, and the road itself on the far side of the woman's body, on the far side of the car, had a narrow strip of clearance on the left, maybe 4 feet, where someone with enough nerve and a low-profile vehicle could thread through without hitting the bodies or the car. I put it in gear. I don't remember making the decision so much as executing a plan that my brain had already calculated. I took the gap on the left, kept my wheels steady, cleared the back end of the car by about 18 inches and came out on the other side. I drove forward 200 feet and let myself breathe. In my rearview mirror, I watched both bodies rise from the ground. I watched people, I counted at least 20, emerge from the grass on both sides of the road. They converged on the spot where I had just been. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. I held it there until I reached the highway on-ramp. I've never been able to confirm what it was that I stumbled into on that canyon road. I've told the story a small number of times over the years, always to veterans or law enforcement, always getting the same quiet, grim nod of recognition. Whatever it was organized. It was waiting, and it was counting on someone stopping to help. I think about that calculation sometimes. The human instinct to stop when you see someone hurt. The terrible way that instinct can be used against you. The sound across the river. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I've lived in rural areas my whole life. I've heard foxes scream in the night, and foxes can produce sounds that will stop your heart if you don't know what they are. I've heard owls, coyotes, wild turkeys, deer in distress. I am not an easily frightened person when it comes to nature sounds, and I have a solid working knowledge of what American wildlife sounds like at night. What happened on the James River is not explained by any of that. A group of us, 5 guys, longtime friends, were night fishing from the western bank of the river on a stretch of shore about 12 miles south of Richmond. It was late September, maybe 10 or 11 at night, warm enough to be comfortable with a fire going. We had camp chairs, coolers, gear scattered around, the kind of comfortable, disorganized setup that only works with people you've known for years. The conversation stopped all at once, not because someone said something, not because we heard anything yet. It was earlier than that, a collective, simultaneous falling silent, the way a group of animals all goes still at the same moment when something changes in the environment. We were all staring at the opposite bank, maybe 80 feet across the water where the tree line met the river's edge in thick shadow. Something was watching us from over there. We all felt it at the same time. Some of the guys laughed it off, that reflexive, slightly too loud laughter that men use to cover over genuine unease. But then it came. A sound from the far bank that I am going to describe to you as accurately as I can. And I want you to understand that no animal I have ever encountered or studied since can produce this sound. It was a scream. But that word is insufficient. It was the sound of a human voice, recognizably human in its pitch and timbre, but stripped of every structure that makes human sound communication. No words, no pattern, no breath control. Just raw, ragged, throat-wrecking sound, high and jagged and full of something I can only call anguish. It went on for 5 or 6 seconds and then stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then it came again, louder, higher, with more force behind it, as if whatever had produced the first one had found a second gear. 2 of us were already moving toward the trucks. The other 3 followed. We retrieved our firearms and came back to the bank, and we stood there in a line, watching the far tree line, weapons down, waiting. We waited a long time. The river made its sounds. The fire popped and settled. And then the third scream came. But this one was different. This one came from our side of the river. From the brush about 30 yards behind us. We did not discuss it. We left. Equipment, chairs, coolers, most of the gear, all of it stayed. We ran to the trucks. As we reached the vehicles, the scream came one final time from just beyond the tree line behind the parking area, close enough that we could feel the air carry it. All 5 of us drove out in a convoy and did not stop driving for 20 minutes. We've all talked about it since. We've all looked up every possible explanation. None of us have found one that fully accounts for the sound, the movement across the river, or the way it seemed to track us. We've never gone back to that stretch of bank. The call from my own house. This one is short. Sometimes the most disturbing stories are. I was headed out to a hockey game on a Friday night with my friend Marcus. We were running late, rushing through traffic, having a genuinely good time. Somewhere in the third period, I reached into my jacket pocket and realized I didn't have my phone. I traced back through my memory and couldn't figure out if I'd left it at home or dropped it somewhere in transit. I borrowed Marcus's phone during intermission and called my own number. It rang 3 times. Then someone picked up. There was no voice, no greeting, no hello, no background noise, just the quiet of an open line. I told whoever it was that I was calling to see if I'd left my phone at home. I said it loudly, clearly, the way you do when you suspect it might be a child or someone hard of hearing. No response. I assumed it was my younger brother Eli messing with me. He had a long history of doing exactly that kind of thing, and I hung up. I got home late, around 11:30. The house was dark. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, and then I called my parents to let them know I was back. They told me they'd gone out that evening. Dinner, then a concert at an outdoor venue, and that Eli had been with them. They'd left shortly after I had. They'd been gone all night. I said goodbye and hung up. I stood in my hallway for a moment. If my family had been gone all evening, if no one from my family had been in that house, then who answered my phone? I heard the back door open and then shut. I was out the front door before the sound had fully registered. I stood on my neighbor's porch and called 911. Officers arrived and did a full sweep. No one was found inside. Nothing was taken. No windows were broken. The only thing they noted was that the back door had been left unlocked. They told me the most likely explanation was that someone had walked in through the unlocked back door, been in the house for an indeterminate amount of time, and left when they heard me coming home. I've thought about the phone call constantly since then. Someone was in that house when I called. Someone picked up, listened, heard me say I was at a hockey game, and made a decision. What that decision was, and what it would have been if I'd come home earlier, I'll never know. The man in the closet. I want to end this with the one that kept me awake for the longest time, not because of what happened, but because of what was found waiting to happen. This happened to my family's neighbor, a veteran named Gerald, about 15 years ago. Gerald was in his late 50s, quiet, methodical, the kind of man who noticed things. He had a daughter named Sophie, who was 7, and a wife who traveled occasionally for work. Shortly after Gerald's family moved in, a new family bought the house next door. Their son, Tyler, was 19 years old. Gerald noticed Tyler in the way that certain people notice certain other people, not with immediate alarm, but with a steadiness of attention that accumulates into something more serious over time. Tyler asked questions about Gerald's service in ways that crossed from curious into fixated. He sought out graphic details. He lingered near the fence when Sophie was playing in the yard. He struck up conversations with her on her walk home from school. And then, one evening, he called the family's home phone and asked to speak with Sophie specifically. Gerald went directly to Tyler's parents. He was very clear about the boundary. Tyler was told to stay away from their property and from Sophie entirely. Things got quiet. And then, a few weeks later, Sophie told her parents that something was living in her closet at night. She said it was there when it was dark, but gone in the daytime. Gerald and his wife attributed this to childhood imagination. Sophie had always had a vivid one, prone to fears about shadows and sounds. They checked the closet. Nothing. They reassured her and moved on. Several weeks after that, Gerald's wife and Sophie went to spend the night at his mother's house for a family event. Gerald stayed home alone. He fell asleep on the couch downstairs around 10 o'clock. At 2 a.m., his phone rang. It was Tyler's father. The voice on the line was apologetic and urgent. He said they'd noticed lights moving in Gerald's upstairs windows. He said Tyler was missing from his room. He said he was sorry to bother Gerald, but he was worried, and could Gerald help look? Gerald, just woken from sleep, said, "What do you mean you saw lights upstairs? I've been asleep on the couch all night." The line went quiet. Gerald hung up. He retrieved his shotgun from the hall closet, went outside to his truck, and was locking his weapon in the vehicle cab when he saw the sheriff's deputy rolling up the street in response to a separate call that had already been placed. Gerald turned back toward his house. The light in Sophie's bedroom was on. He could see a silhouette through the curtains, pacing, slow and deliberate. Deputies entered the house. They found Tyler in Sophie's room. He had set up a space in her closet, a folded blanket, a small light source, personal items. He had been in the house for several hours. In his statement, Tyler told investigators that he liked to watch Sophie sleep, that he had done this before, that the best time was when the moonlight came through the curtains. Sophie had not been imagining something in her closet. Every story in this video comes from a real person who lived it. Some of them found ways to carry it. Some of them didn't. All of them changed the way they moved through the world after what happened to them. Check your locks tonight, not because something is definitely out there, but because sometimes something is, and the difference between one outcome and another is a deadbolt, a phone call, a cat that walks across a hallway at exactly the right moment. Sleep well.